Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive or if you think like one and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Metcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve even more extraordinary results. Because no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. In today's show, I speak with Erik Martinson, who is the chief executive and the founder of Svea Solar. This is a Swedish-based solar panel company who's actually grown from a couple of students in 2013 to a 9-figure, 1,000 employee business, hitting number 164 in the Financial Times 1000 list of fastest growing companies. So they've created a huge success, but in fact the business started really small and indeed was quite small, only operating in one market until just a couple of years ago when they entered 4 markets simultaneously. And that's really kickstarted their international expansion and the fact that they're really a rising force in the renewables world and in the energy world at large. So this is a really fantastic conversation with a really interesting entrepreneur. We talk about the scaling the organization versus scaling the company, how to set right expectations when recruiting new employees, how you even find new employees in such a new and pioneering field as the one that Erik's in, and how he keeps everybody focused on purpose and on growth. Hi, Erik, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Hey, it's great to have you today. I know you've achieved extraordinary things over the last 8 or 9 years, I guess. You founded Svea Solar, I think, pretty much straight out of university.
Yes.
And now, you've got 1,000 employees. You're growing extremely fast. You've made the Financial Times 1000 list of the fastest growing companies in the world. And for me, more importantly, you're really somebody on a mission, right? What I get about you is that you are trying to change the way the world consumes electricity, solves the climate issues and so forth. So tell me a bit about that story. We'll get into some of those secrets of scaling in a minute and like how you've been able to do that, how you've been able to create it. But let's go back to the why. What led you, what got you going on this journey, and why is it important to you?
I mean, basically, I've always been very interested in renewables and how we can sort of push the boundaries on taking away fossil fuels. And I mean, the way we're living today, I mean, that needs to be done. And I also always wanted to work in that field. And I tried to get a job at Tesla a couple of times. That didn't go very well. But me and Björn had founded Svea Solar. We started together in Linköping and we had different business ideas. We looked into wind and realized that one windmill was roughly 5 million euros and we didn't have that type of money. So we looked into solar, and like everyone else, we thought that solar won't work in Sweden. But then we started looking into the financials and how it works and realized that, yeah, it does work really well here as well. And then we started to work from there and now have scaled out the company into 5 countries and will over the next 4 or 5 years cover 80% of Europe in terms of reach.
Wow. So let me just pick up on a couple of those things there, Erik, already. First of all, there were these experiences which perhaps, at the time were so good. You tried to apply for Tesla, didn't get there. Probably at the time it was like, oh, that would have been great. And yet, that failure was the seeds of huge success afterwards. And then also this point of just really pragmatically looking around the market and looking and, this is too expensive. We don't have the budget for this. So it's just interesting, that iterative process of looking around and exploring. And then you talked about the scaling, right? So 5 countries already. I think you said it's about 1,000 employees, you said. So, and that was over 8 years, 9 years?
Yeah, 8.5 years.
Okay. And where, just go back, say halfway in that journey, were you at 4 countries halfway, or were you still at 1 country? Often the growth can be quite different.
Yeah, it's basically the first 5 years we were only in Sweden, so we became sort of the market leader there, and then we actually did our first real fundraising 2020, so that wasn't that far away. So we were profitable running the company quite hard in Sweden, and then we sort of geared up to go into more markets. So we went into 4 markets simultaneously. So that was also during the pandemic. So you can argue that the timing wasn't perfect. So we actually went in March, April, basically, and then sort of that was when people were talking about basically some problems in China for logistics, and that changed to something else basically. But I mean, now we're scaling up and growing really, really well, and I think by next year more than half of the employees will be outside of Sweden, basically. So it's a good growth in our countries. I mean, Germany, we went in and we're doing roughly just a couple of installations per month, and now we have basically went from number 3,000 installers, in Germany to maybe top 5 now in about 1.5 years. So, we've been growing quite well in Germany, and are growing really well in Spain as well, and also in Netherlands and Belgium. But I think in general, I mean, our job is basically to scale as fast as possible with good quality, and ensuring that we are, getting everything aligned in the company.
Yeah. So it sounds like there was this moment when you decided now is the time to go big. So it sounds like there was an ignition point, which was probably around the fundraising, but there was obviously a decision as well. Now is the time you want to actually raise the money and go for it. What was the catalyst, perhaps when you suddenly went, what, we can take this really big? Or was it always the ambition, it just took longer than you thought? Or was there a moment when you said, okay, actually, this has got legs, this has got potential?
I mean, we did do a quite steep sort of plan, because when we were setting up the shop, we were sort of like, if we're going to do some difference to the world, we need to scale. But we were maybe a little bit limited on how we were thinking, because we said, we're going to be the largest solar provider in Sweden. We will focus on that. So we did achieve that. And then we sort of realized, if we can, in a very short period of time, without any funding, become the largest player in Sweden. So there's no one saying that, why would we not be able to be a winner in Europe? And I mean, if we have a market share of roughly 25-30% in the Swedish market, which is the highest market share basically of any larger European market, we realized, we have something really good going on here. So we started to look into and talk with some investors, and they also pointed out that no one else has basically done this type of journey that we are doing. So we started to look. I'm quite confident that we can sort of duplicate this and do it in a maybe even easier environment. Because I mean, if you look, even if it works well with solar in Sweden, it's still easier to get the financials working in Spain, even in Germany and other markets. So we were trained in a quite harsh environment. So when we went into our customers, talking with our customers in Spain, and they were talking about 5 years payoff time, we had 10. It was like selling ice cream in Sahara. So it was super easy. So that's really, I mean, the way we have built a very lean machinery in Sweden helps us be very successful abroad, where maybe competition is a little bit spoiled in terms of how easy it is to sell, for example.
Yeah, it's often the case as well when companies begin in a recession. They often become so lean because they've done it, and when things get better, they scale. It's a bit similar. It sounds that you kind of had to really prove yourself out in Sweden, and then expanding was easier. What was it about the way you operated, even when you were simply in Sweden, that made you successful? If you look back, what were the secrets of success in those early days?
I think that there are a lot of solar companies that raised a massive amount of money, and they just spent it on a lot of things and build up a lot of layers and so on. We were super lean. I mean, we were 2 students with student funding. We had basically 0 cash. So we built only the essentials, very, very specific, and that's been, I think, a key thing for us, that we are spending the money, I think, quite wisely. And that makes that every dollar we spend, we get X amounts, where our competition probably get half X on growth. So that's been good for us, but also in terms of really understanding how we're building the organization quite early. I mean, we started to run into problems when me and Björn were running the show, and basically taking all the decisions ourselves, and realizing we are limiting our growth of the company, and really empowering other leaders in the company quite early. Is something that I think have been instrumental to our growth journey.
How was that? Because a lot of founders struggle, and we were talking a bit earlier, a lot of managers struggle because they're often great at making decisions. They understand quite a lot about the context of the business and how it all fits together, and it can be hard to let go.
Yeah, I mean, it's super tough, and we're not saying that we did very well. I mean, we actually did run into a lot of problems. Me and Björn was quite overworked. I mean, the more we grow, the more we had to do, and it was not scalable at all. And we worked a tremendous amounts of hours, and we sort of just, almost like, the more we scale, the more work we get. This is not going to work, and we started to realize, so what are we going to do? And we didn't have any experience previously on how to structure any organization. So we started to really look into things. So how can we really make this scalable? Instead of just, in the beginning, we said we're going to scale the company. And then we realized, no, we're going to scale the organization. It's a big difference. I mean, scaling the company, we look at revenue basically, but scaling organization is basically, working with leaderships, working with really talented people. And this is the reason why, we started to sort of look into what is the key factors for us between a 5 to 10 years plan really achieve our goals. And we sort of realized, like, is it that we have the best product offer? Is that we have the best marketing? And like, yeah, all of those are super important. Right. But when it comes to the essence, it's how we can attract and how we can keep and develop the talent within the company. Those are the 3 top priorities of the entire company. So we started to really think about this in another type of way than a lot of companies are doing, especially sort of in the installation industry. So like really get good people out there. And that's why we have evolved this idea over time. And at the moment right now, since February, we actually have our HR officer, Hannah Manberg, at the very top of the company, together with me running the management team. So like really focusing on the HR questions in a way that I think very few companies are doing. I mean, a lot of people are always talking about, we'll take care of our employees, but it doesn't really show in how they put their management team together or how they put their structure in the organization. So we have really tried to work on that, and also to scale culture. I mean, we have really focused on how can we build a culture that's scalable with really being clear and transparent on how we deal with certain things at Svea and what our sort of words mean to us and what we're trying to do as leaders. And talk a lot about how can we empower our leaders and really get from sort of talking points to actions, and I think that have been quite successful for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. So first of all, I love it. I've just spent 2 days myself working with the senior HR leadership team of a large multiple $billion company, and they do have the ear of the CEO. The CEO introduced me to that team and wants to develop it. And yet what they're experiencing in terms of not necessarily the CEO, but other parts of the business, is that it's seen, HR is still seen as a bit of a nice to have. And yet it's in the middle of the tech sector where there's a war for talent, where, and actually it's a services business. And so people are actually everything. And yet not every company really deeply walks the talk around that. So I'm curious, like, how did you make those things real in your business? Because everyone can kind of say, you just said the things that you're saying. So how did you how did you have to invest yourself or your time or your focus?
First of all, it's very important to understand that HR is commercial critical, not a benefit for employees. So I got the question at one seminar because we're talking about HR things, and we were there to talk about how we're doing this setup and how we're working with it and so on. And I got one question from the audience. It's like, so how do I get my CEO to talk more about HR stuff instead of just profits, and why can't we have some money more spent on HR instead of getting just higher profits every year? And I said, you need to change that completely around. I said, why don't your CEO spend more on HR questions to get higher profits? I mean, it's not the other way around. So first of all, you need to understand as an organization that it's not a trade-off. If you can really align the organization, it's a fantastic boost for all your KPIs. And you'll get more out of your employees. They will be happier. They will stay longer. They will, be more empowered. They will get, all of that. So creating that culture is not only like good for the company, it's critical. Especially if you want to have a high growth base. I mean, if you're not going to grow anything with a company, maybe you can have a decent company that's okay. But every company with more HR folks, I would argue, would do better. So how do you then go from sort of those words to action? I think that, it's like, if someone asks, like, so what are you spending your time on? I mean, usually what you do is, if you really want to look what people are spending your time on, you bring up the calendar, basically. So what meetings do you have? What you're doing, basically. So, just showing the org chart, I think shows a little bit. So where do you put your HR people? How do they work? And what kind of forums are they in? What kind of mandate do they have? And that is, I think, one way to start. But it's super important. And I think this is where a lot of companies go wrong, is basically just taking a regular HR person that are not thinking in a commercial way, saying that they should get more power. Because the first thing they're going to do is just to raise benefits and like not think about, so is this holistically the good thing for the company? And it's not necessarily always nice things you need to do. It's really being, true to the company and the employees. What is the best fit? And it's also about, being very, targeted. What type of culture do you want to have, and bringing that type of people? So being very consistent in recruiting, being very transparent. I mean, when you're recruiting people, one mistake that I think a lot of people are doing is that they really want the candidate so bad, so they will basically say anything to the candidate about what the company is doing, and when they promise anything in an interview. I can be quite transparent and say, this is the problem we have. You're here to fix that problem. If you think that's exciting, you're more than happy to come here. But if you are looking for things that are done and in structure and that are super easy or already set, this is not the type of company you want to come in. Here's a company where you can be challenged, you can really change the world in a good way, but it's going to require quite hard work, and a lot of people are really inspired by that, but not everyone. But if you're inspired and you think that I want to be part of this power shift, as we call it, by taking away fossil fuels completely, then you would really fit our culture. But it means that you're not coming to a set table. You will be part of setting the table, basically.
Hi, this is Richard. I hope you're enjoying this conversation. This is just a quick interlude to tell you about my book, Making Time for Strategy, which is being released in January 2023. It deals with perhaps the number one challenge I've come across in my coaching work with top executives: how to get out of the weeds of operations and make time for the high impact strategic work that will lead to breakthrough results. If you're serious about multiplying your impact, you do need to elevate your use of time. So I highly recommend that you head over to makingtimeforstrategy.com, where you can find out more about the book and download some free chapters. Now, back to the conversation.
Yeah, I love it. There's some really great points there. First of all, that real reality check of looking at the organizational chart, and just said being honest, so having the hard conversation now about what's going to happen, rather than trying to have it afterwards when people are more committed, or like they're in and they've got their paycheck and everything else. And I think this point about, for HR leaders, translating what they do to business language, I just see it all the time. In fact, with this group that I was working with, I was like, you will not sell what you're talking about in this room outside the organization until you do what you just said, right? Until you say, this is the issue we're solving. It's like, we're not going with the, employee value proposition, right? That, who cares, right? Nobody cares about that. They care what that provides. It provides clarity. It allows you to attract the right people to the business. It allows you to retain people and so forth. And I think when you have that conversation, then people get interested. So so I think this is great. So tell me a bit about what's been your learning as you've expanded. Obviously, in the last 2 or 3 years, you've expanded into perhaps 4 countries. So what's been the biggest challenge there that you've had to overcome?
I think, not being able to work like at the very, you see problems in an organization that you want to fix right away. It's kind of, it will take your enthusiasm away from a lot of colleagues and leaders if you go in and solve problems that you see can be fixed right away. Sometimes it's better that the problem takes longer time to get solved if you have the right people solve it, and you train the organization to solve problems in the future. Because in the beginning of the journey, even if we were sort of getting leaders, to train leaders to lead other people, me and Björn were still running around and fixing a lot of problems that I think caused a little bit of inertia in terms of what's happening within the organization. So I think that, really understanding that when you're handing a task to a team, you're there to support the team, not to solve the task for them. I think that's super crucial, and it's still hard for me sometimes to do that, and I struggle with it every day, because if you're an entrepreneur, you want to go forward, you want to solve the problems, and that's what you're usually good at. But you need to really constantly think about what happens, what's the trade-off if you solve this task maybe a week earlier. I mean, yes, you will get a week faster on that problem, but you might end up at losing out both talents, but also enthusiasm, and maybe the decision wasn't even better. So it's really about, because you're hiring experts, right, to solve tasks. If you come in and solve them for them, it's basically you're gonna make them feel uninspired. It's gonna make them be less likely to work hard for you in the future and solve an even more complex problem. But it's also gonna create that the organization is stalling. So I think those are the number one learnings, or that sort of to work on really ensuring that you get the top talents in that you need, and get them to sort of really build their own organizations in part of the company, and solve the problems by themselves. Obviously, in tune with the rest of the organization. And my job then really becomes to sort of get the organization in tune rather than doing any tasks, basically. And that's very far from actually installing the panels yourself on the roof. So I mean, I think that both me and Björn have developed quite a lot as leaders during the 8.5 years of the company's time.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, and what's exciting about these journeys is that it's never ending, right? There's always new things to learn, and once you break out of one comfort zone into another area, then there's another area always available. I love this point around thinking through the second order consequences of the decisions you make in the moment. I often say to leaders, you've got a choice. You go fast now, or you build momentum, right? You build the capability of the organization. And the temptation is always to go fast now and just get it done. But as you said, the second order consequences, people become even more dependent on me. They lose motivation, and probably as a result, I feel even more strongly that I need to solve all the problems because I'm not seeing the energy around me anymore. So it can become a vicious circle. Let's switch gear, Erik. For the sake of time here, I've got a couple of quick fire questions I'd like to ask guests to find out a bit about who or what has helped structure their own leadership thinking. What's a favorite quote that you live by, or that you're always telling the people around you, or that inspires you?
Oh, that's a very tough one, but I would say that, I mean, think different, so which is sort of maybe more of another company's quote. But I mean, I think really, doing that, inspires good innovation. I think that's, you need to really, what is the best way of solving something. I think that quote takes it down to basically, don't just take it for granted. Everyone else have done it this way. Well, can we do it in a better way? Yeah.
Nice. And what about a book that's really inspired you or influenced you, perhaps, in the way you operate?
Well, I think that, Bill Gates wrote a book about climate change that I think is very, very good. I mean, and I would maybe not say that was completely game changer for me, but it's a very good structured book that I think have breaking down the problem in a good way that can be very sort of easy to for myself and others to sort of get into and really sort of look at, if you sort of break it down, what do we need to do to fix the climate crisis, you realize that sort of energy is maybe the major problem here, and I'm happy to keep working on solving that together with other great people.
Yeah, and actually, I want to just honor you at this point. Thank you for working on these topics. They are genuinely important for our world, right? And it's exciting to see people who are all in and making it happen. So thank you for that. What about advice? What advice would you, if you were to go back and talk to yourself at the start of this journey, perhaps your 20-year-old self, what advice would you have given him?
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I'm still a very impatient person in many ways, but I mean, being a little bit more calm, meaning that, not that we run sort of slower, but, be more consistent, saying that, like, if you have a small problem, it can be sort of the whole world for you right now. But if you look at your problems that you have right now and think about that in like 3-5 years time for the company and yourself, is those problems that big? Usually they are not. And don't get too stressed about small problems that you can sort of just, calmly fix and be more focused on the long-term agenda. Going back to what we said there with, empowering leaders and all of that, really build long-term. I think that, we have tried to do that, but I think we could have been more calm, be more sort of, always looking at the long target rather than just solving, problems quickly and be very, very nervous about things that doesn't really matter. I think that is something that I try to work on a lot today. When you see something that you get really annoyed about or takes a lot of your energy or stressed, then really think about, is this really that bad? And usually the answer is no.
Yeah, Yeah, it's great. So yeah, so often we get consumed by these short-term issues, and actually zoom forward a month, 6 months, we can't really
Exactly.
remember it.
It's really, if you think about it, I mean, will this long term hurt myself, any colleagues, or the company? And the answer is usually no. But I mean, obviously, if it's yes, then you should worry about it and you should fix it right away. But normally, I mean, if you can spend less energy on sort of day-to-day problems that really aren't moving the needle, you can then start to think long term, especially as the CEO of the company. I mean, your job is not to work on day-to-day operations all the time. It's also to really align the company, as I mentioned before, also get everyone else in the management team and in the company to work together and fine-tune the company, and also attract talent and so on. But I think having that mindset that you always remind yourself, is this that bad right now? And the answer is very, very often, no, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Perfect. So, Erik, many of our best guests come on the show actually come from referrals. So I always love to ask people, who's somebody who inspires you, right? Who's an impactful CEO, who perhaps you've dealt with, you've encountered in your own life or business, who would be a great guest for this kind of show? Who comes to mind? Who inspires you?
I think that, I mean, if you look at great startups in the renewables, I mean, there's very, there's some really great entrepreneurs out there, and I mean, I used to try to get a job at Tesla a couple of times, obviously. So there's some, really good people, and some people that work there. And Peter Carlson, that now started Northvolt a couple of years ago, that are now building up the largest battery factory in Europe. They're doing a fantastic job, and I think that's really, pushing the boundaries. So I think that listening to Peter would be fantastic.
Yeah. And what inspires you about him?
I think that the idea of thinking really big, changing an industry from basically, everyone said that there's basically not going to be any battery factories in Europe, and China and US have, they're taking that market. And I think that, by just showcasing that, you can build a massive battery factory up in the north of Sweden, have attracted a lot of capital to that area, and now you see a lot of other battery factories being started up in all over Europe. So I think it is inspiring to take an industry from basically 0 to 100% in a couple of years' time. It's super impressive.
Yeah. Thank you. So no matter what we've achieved, there's always a next level. So I'm always curious to know, what's where do you go from here as a business? Where does Svea Solar go? Obviously you've achieved a lot. You're in 5 markets. I know you said you wanted to expand more into Europe. What's the next couple of years got in store for you, do you think?
I think that, I mean, now we are 1,000 employees, and our goal is to reach 5,000 employees in the upcoming 4 years. So quite a steep scale up. But I mean, there is no boundaries on what we can do. I think that in 10 years' time, I think it's doable that we as a company are eliminating as much CO2 emissions that the entire country of Sweden is emitting every year. So I think that's a target that we're trying to work for as a starting point. But I think, what I think is inspiring, going back to sort of potential for solar, I believe long term that solar will stand for roughly 70 to 75% of all the world's energy. And if you sort of go back to sort of break it down, I mean, industry, energy, and transportation is basically somewhere around roughly 80% of all the CO2 emissions. If you electrify all of those, and then you say that roughly 70 to 75% of that energy will come from solar, you could argue that solar would offset roughly half of all the CO2 emissions in the world. And I think just working on that is super inspiring by itself. And that's why, going back to our company, the faster we can scale, the more sort of CO2 emissions we can eliminate. So that's why, scaling is in our DNA. I mean, we have set up the company to scale, and we will keep pushing the boundaries on what we can do and how fast we can scale the company. Yeah,
beautiful. And what do you need to do personally to multiply your impact, Erik? What's your next level? What's the stretch in all this for you?
I think you need to be very humble and understand that, I mean, you as a CEO and founder can be a great asset to a company, but also a great liability if you're not evolving with the company. So it's a constant learning process, and it's my job to be able to cope with the growth as a company. And if I can't do that, someone else will need to take over that role.
Yeah, well, it's going to be an interesting journey ahead. It's really exciting to hear a little bit about it, Erik. So thank you so much for taking some time. You're somebody with a mission, and I really truly respect that. I always get inspired when people are out there literally trying to change the world, and I think you are. So thank you for showing some of the journey and some of the really practical and pragmatic lessons right along the way about how you actually create this great distinction that you shared, I think, which is don't just scale the company, but scale the organization, right? And actually you need to build that organization that can multiply as the business grows. So I think some fascinating learnings from you today. So thank you, Erik, and I look forward to hearing how the story evolves.
Thank you very much. Appreciate for being on.
Okay, goodbye.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.